Hi, welcome to our YouTube channel Teleporto. My name is Zhenya or Evgeny. I know that it's a bit difficult for English speakers, but still, it's my name. And today we're gonna talk about the really hot topic among the immigrants. It's the taxes in Portugal. We found out that there are not so many professional videos about how taxation system in Portugal works. And there are also a lot of misconceptions about the Portugal taxes, like a lot of people sure that they need to pay 0% if they're residents of Portugal and have an HR. And that's why today we are meeting with a professional tax and business lawyers from the company NEWCO, which is situated in Madeira. And we're not only going to talk about taxation, but we're also going to talk about the incorporation of company in Madeira and which benefits it presents to its founders. And we will also discuss topics like NHR, the old NHR and new NHR, also a tax residency in Portugal, and we'll talk about the foreign income. So this video is going to be very interesting. Keep watching. Roberto, do I pronounce your name correctly first of all? Yeah, Roberto.
Correct.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, nice to meet you. So tell us please, what do you do in a NEWCO company?
So I'm a tax lawyer, specializing, of course, in tax matters for companies and individuals. During the last few years, because of the popularity of Portugal, I specialized a bit more on individual clients, so people coming from abroad to settle in Portugal, to work, to invest. And here at NEWCO, because our core business is actually assisting companies, I also address or try to assist in the structuring of investments in the context of the Madeira International Business Center or not.
Perfect. That's really great that you specialize in individual taxes because actually, I guess individual taxes, especially the taxes of immigrants, is the most hot topic around Portugal right now. At least a lot of our clients, I guess every one of them probably asking about how can I optimize my taxes? Or which taxes should I pay in Portugal? Yeah, so I hope you will clear out some points for our viewers. Yeah, and maybe some questions will be quite obvious for you. Yeah, but anyway, I guess for our viewers it's important in order to understand how to operate with their taxes in mainland and here in Madeira.
Very well.
Yeah, so let's start probably from the most important question, yeah, the residency, the tax residency. So, for example, I've just become to Portugal, yeah, or to Madeira, it doesn't matter. Do I immediately become a tax resident here or not?
Well, it actually depends. So tax residency in Portugal is triggered by several ways, but there are two main ways through which one can become a tax resident of Portugal. The first is that any given year you spend more than 183 days here. And the second is that at any given point of the year, it can be on the 20th of December, you have a house in Portugal, so a property in Portugal, with the intention of using it as your permanent dwelling. This is an open concept, and at the end of the day, in practice, what the main points that you need to be worried with is with the 183 days, if you spend them or not in Portugal, or if you basically go to the tax authorities and register with a Portuguese address. One important point is that sometimes, for instance, in the case of Ukrainians with a temporary protection, when the temporary protection is issued, they automatically become tax residents of Portugal. So we have had in the past several clients that they weren't aware that they had become tax residents of Portugal. So you must always have an holistic perspective into this, and taking into account first the triggers of the tax residence also, and also your immigration status. At the end of the day, the most relevant point is the registration with the tax authorities, but you never know if the deadline or the timeline of the 103 days is met or not, so you need to be careful with that.
It's very interesting point about the temporary protection. So probably it works the same with residence permit, yeah?
Yes.
Probably.
So basically, when you receive a residence permit, most of them entail that you must spend at least 6 months in a year in Portugal.
Yeah.
By spending 6 months, as I said in the previous answer, you will automatically fall within the concept of tax residence. So basically, most residence permits have the inner obligation of you becoming tax resident of Portugal.
Yeah, sure.
There is one relevant exception, that is the golden visa. The golden visa has actually this optimal solution when you want just a second passport. So you want to, at a given point in time, in 5 years, apply for the Portuguese citizenship, but you do not want to become a tax resident. And the golden visa, you can renovate it and obtain it by spending basically 1 week per year in Portugal. So it's the only residence permit that doesn't come with it attached. Of course, there are other cases, for instance, digital nomads. Whenever they do not need a residence permit, they can come to Portugal, stay 2 or 3 months, and this will not trigger, per se, tax residency. But as I said in the beginning, you really need to look into several perspectives, some of them not only tax related, to determine the tax residency.
Very interesting. And about the golden visa, yeah, just a little bit. As I understand, it's almost impossible to get a golden visa right now. I mean, you can invest in funds still, but buying a property, it became almost impossible.
Yeah. So what happened is that the government created, it was discussed almost for 1 year. So the first announcement was in February. There was a long discussion until October. And since October, the most popular way of obtaining a golden visa was cancelled. So previously, you would obtain a golden visa by buying a property of 500k or 350k for urban rehabilitation. But because this was seen by the government as something that somehow aggravated the housing crisis, the government opted to cancel it. And now there are several ways of obtaining a golden visa, but none with the real estate. And the real estate was the main one. The most popular one, according to our experience, is the investment in units of Portuguese investment funds. There are other types of golden visa or other routes of golden visa, such as investing in the Portuguese cultural heritage. But when you invest, for instance, in the Portuguese cultural heritage, you do not receive anything back apart from the golden visa.
Mostly,
so you basically buy the
visa.
It's not an investment with a return, which is something that, well, typically people look for.
But let's get back to taxes here, because the golden visa is a very interesting topic, but probably we'll have some videos in the future about it. And you mentioned one of the way of becoming a tax resident, have a permanent house here, have an intention of living in Portugal. And as I understand, if you come to the tax authority and say, hey, please, can you change address in my NIF from from London or from UK or wherever, to the Portuguese one? In this case, I immediately become a tax resident, yeah?
Correct. That's actually the formal way of becoming a tax resident. So you basically go to the tax authorities, or nowadays you can even do it online on your Portal das Finanças, and you change your address to a Portuguese one. That is the beginning of your tax residence. What can happen is that in case you only do this, and at let's imagine that on the day after you move out of Portugal, but you do not deregister, first you will always be registered as tax resident in Portugal, and then depending on the country that you go, the other country may also consider you a tax resident. And then there will be conflicts of residence that are always unpleasant. Of course, there are tax treaties to decide at the end of the day in which country you are resident, but for sure you do not want to enter into that, let's say, kind of worms of being considered resident in one place and on the other. So what I typically advise my clients is to, if you register as tax resident of Portugal, well, that's absolutely fine, but always bear in mind that you need to keep some kind of connection with Portugal. You need to live in Portugal or to spend the minimum amount of days in Portugal. And then if you move abroad, the first thing that you should do is go to the tax authorities and change back your address. There are several cases where Portugal is a country of immigrants. So basically we have youngsters, most of them, they end up their college and they move to other country in Europe or outside of Europe, and they never change the tax address. And what happens is that in some years, sometimes, they want to move back to Portugal, but they still have the address in Portugal, and they cannot benefit, for instance, from the NHR, from other tax incentives, just because of that. And then the process to do the correction backwards, well, it's a bit complex. It's feasible, but it's complex and takes time. So always try to have the tax residence as something that follows the different stages of your life and where you spend most time.
Yeah, I actually recently I've gone through some of the code decisions at your website. There are some available. Yeah, I translated them into English. Still difficult for me to read in Portuguese. And there are a lot of cases when people just forget to change their address, and the tax authority comes to them and say, "Hey, you need to pay taxes." And in this case, they need to prove that they have not been living in Portugal all this time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so basically what you need to do is to file an application with the Portuguese tax authorities where you attach basically certificates of tax residence. Potentially they may ask for tax returns, rental agreements. Well, basically they can ask for proofs that you effectively, under the terms of the tax treaty with Portugal and the place where you have been living, you were a resident of the other country. Typically, people will be able to provide such documents. The main issue is that currently these retroactive corrections are taking almost 1 year or even more than 1 year to happen. So we can be before an unpleasant situation where you decide, okay, I want to move to Portugal, but I only want to effectively move to Portugal in case I can benefit from the NHR or the return program. And you end up in a limbo because you still need to do the correction of the previous 5 years. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's certainly something that has been happening a lot, and we have the expertise to change it or to modify it, but it takes time.
Mm-hmm. It's very important. I don't know. Maybe it's a fact. Maybe it's a rumor, but still, yeah, that the most important thing for the tax authority is still an address, yeah? And for example, if the person have been present in Portugal since the 1st of January, for example, yeah, but he changed his tax address only in November, for example. There is a rumor, then in this case, he will be considered a tax resident only since November. Is it true, or tax authority will check the presence of this person on the Portuguese soil?
Well, nowadays, according to my knowledge, it's still difficult for tax authorities to track down your presence or not. I know that there are, particularly at the EU level, some systems that are being implemented in order to facilitate the tracking down of the presence in Portugal. I still advise my clients to always be aware of the 183 days rule or the permanent dwelling rule, because these two are the main ones, not the only ones, but the main ones. In Portugal, indeed, you have this concept of partial residence.
Yeah.
This means that in case you change your address, for instance, as in November out of Portugal, you will be considered resident in Portugal from the 1st of January until the 30th of November, and then from the 1st of December until the end of the year, you will not be considered resident in Portugal. and will not be taxed in Portugal over your worldwide income. So you have this split year concept, which is relatively recent in the Portuguese personal income tax system, but it exists. Still, at the end of the day, and as of the moment we are speaking, the main form or the main way of control of the tax authorities is the formality of the registration with your NIF.
Yeah.
But we never know if the tax authorities first will challenge your effective presence by asking, for instance, to a rental agreement, by asking you for other proofs that you spent time in Portugal, so that you had your children in the school, that you were in the gym, that your credit card statements. Of course, we are in a pathetical scenario, but we must be prepared to the tax authorities being somehow aggressive. The Portuguese tax authorities are still not. I hear reports, for instance, from Spain, where the tax authorities are a lot more aggressive, but we never know when this will change. So I always like to take precautions and be very conservative on the approach.
Yeah, I totally agree with you because I also noticed that a lot of tax consultants right now saying that it's okay, the Portuguese government is really chill and tax authority is also chill, but you always need to be aware because everything can happen and the situation can change.
And this can happen also the other way around. Particularly the Scandinavian countries, we had a regime, the NHR regime, when it first was created until 2020, about 2020. It was foreseen a full exemption, for instance, on pension income. So foreign source pension income would be exempt. Because of this, Sweden and Finland canceled the tax treaty with Portugal in an unilateral way. And those countries were particularly disappointed with the NHR regime and wanted, of course, to tax the pensions of their pensioners. And so for those cases particularly, I feel that there was even more necessary to have ways of demonstrating that the citizen was effectively living in Portugal. Because, as I said, on the other way around, the source country may also say, no, you are not a resident of Portugal, you are instead a resident of Sweden or Finland, whatever. And depending on how aggressive the tax authorities are, this can happen. Also with Spain, we have, of course, Spain is our neighbor country. You can basically just cross the road.
Yeah, I've been.
and be in Spain or the other way around. And so we have cases of NHRs that they have their work in Spain, they have their employment in Spain, they have all their connections with Spain, and they only cross the river to come to Portugal. So this can trigger some issues, and the tax authorities, are always paying attention to that.
And you also mentioned partial residence, yeah? And you mentioned the case when you actually live in Portugal in November, for example, and you're not considered a tax resident anymore. And what about the vice versa situation? When you changed your address in November, in this case, you will be considered only November, December, or?
Yes. So in case you lived, let's say in Russia,
yes,
until the 1st of October.
Yeah.
And you come to Portugal and you go to tax authorities and register a tax resident on the 1st of October, you will only be subject to Portugal on your worldwide income as from that day and until the end of the year. The income that you obtained before, unless it's sourced in Portugal, it will not be taxed here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's the main consequence of the partial residence criteria.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and if I changed back my address, for example, to Russian one, I also stop being a tax resident.
Correct.
Yeah. Before we get to the NHR and everything, I want to ask: are there any basic tax benefits for the first year of tax residency?
Well, you always have some benefits in Portugal, mainly consisting in tax deductions. So you have tax deductions in case you have children. You have an interesting tax deduction a question that several clients make to me is, why do people always ask me for the NIF when I go grocery shopping? When I do something?
Yes.
And the answer, well, it's relatively simple, is that until like 10 years ago, we had a huge problem with the informal economy. So people would do transactions but wouldn't report them. So the government created some incentives to foster first the communication of invoices, the issues of invoices, and those were essentially a credit of 250 euros per year in case of up to 250 euros in case you ask for the issuance of invoices with your NIF. You are also entitled to some government bonds that are every week. There is a game where they sort some government bonds. So you have also those, and then you can deduct some healthcare expenses, educational expenses, also rents, a portion of the rents of the housing. So there are not many tax deductions in Portugal, with the exception of the special regimes that we will address. But yeah, depending on it always depends on a case-by-case basis. So, for instance, in case you are a freelancer, you have a specific set of expenses that you can deduct. Also, in case you are an employee, well, it's also a bit different. So it's really a case-by-case basis. But at the end of the day, there are not as many immediate deductions apart from the ones that I mentioned.
As I know, like, the main benefit, for example, you mentioned the freelancers, atividade, if I'm correctly name it, we call them like individual entrepreneurs, something like that. So in case of them, the main deductions they have for the first year, it's social security, so they don't pay.
Yes, there's an exemption for freelancers. The first 12 months there is a social security exemption, and then of course you will start paying it.
And on income tax also some exemptions.
Yes. Well, it's not, let's say, an exemption. It's what we call, we have for freelancers what we call the simplified regime. The simplified regime applies to those that have an annual income below 200,000 euros. In case you have this annual income, the taxable income is determined through the application of some specific coefficients. The most typical coefficient that applies is the 0.75 coefficient. That means basically that 75% of your income will be taxed. The other 25% will be exempt. You will need to justify up to 15% of the expenses, but they will be exempt. So this brings some opportunities for tax efficiency. But at the end of the day, it's a regime that is also made to somehow compensate the fact that you are an individual entrepreneur. I wouldn't call it a benefit. It certainly doesn't do no harm. It's basically a way of simplifying the accounting of freelancers, of private entrepreneurs, and allowing them to save basically the hassle of having an organized accountant, having a certified accountant, etc. But yes, at the end of the day, it brings tax benefits. Yes.
But if I'm not mistaken, to conclude about the simplified tax regime, the freelancers should also have a certain amount of expenses, like 15%, if I'm not mistaken.
They must justify up to 15% of expenses. But this is made how? Well, basically, at the web portal of the Portuguese tax authorities, in case you ask for the invoices related with your activity with the NIF, they will appear in the website of the Portuguese tax authorities, and you officially allocate them to your professional activity.
You can
That's
deduct.
also one of the reasons why you should or you must always ask for an invoice with the NIF, particularly when the expense is related with your professional activity.
Now also a little bit about the new tax benefits. I guess I haven't sent you question prior to interview, but probably you know. There is a new tax benefit for youngsters who probably not so young, but younger than 35 years old, so they are subject to a flat rate of 15% and some benefits on IMT and something like that. You have heard about it, definitely.
Yes. Well, one important thing is that this is a proposal.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a proposal that was presented last week
Yeah.
by a government that is a minority government. So in Portugal, currently, the laws that deal with taxes or that impose taxes must be approved in the parliament, and you need to have a majority in the parliament to approve them. The party that is in the government, as is in office, currently does not have that majority, so they must sort and make some deals with the other political forces in order to approve them. However, the proposal exists and the intention exists, and the government basically wants to stop or prevent the loss of talent that we have been seeing. So several students end their university courses and move abroad in the search of better conditions. And so until 35 years of age, there will be a strong reduction in personal income taxes. As I said, it's still to be seen. Initial estimates point out to a reduction of at least 1/3 of the applicable rate. And there will be also, in the context of the tackling of the housing crisis, a broad exemption for the real estate transfer tax, the IMT. Mm-hmm. But still, we must see this announcement with a pinch of salt, because at the end of the day, this might not come into force. Still, it's a good intention. I believe that although it's aimed particularly to the Portuguese youngsters, it will also be attractive for non-Portuguese,
yes.
So people coming from abroad, because they will be able to benefit from it.
So it will be. For example, I'm younger than 35, at least for several years still. Yeah, so if I'm tax resident of Portugal and if I have a residence permit, it's also can be applicable to me, yeah?
Yes. Well, particularly in the case of the European citizens, Portugal cannot make a distinction between Portuguese citizens and EU citizens. And then the fact that you are a tax resident, by having a valid residence permit, there is absolutely no reason to restrict the access in that regard. It would be, in my view, illegal. So yeah, there are some estimates already in terms of the benefit that will come attached to the proposal, and up to a certain amount of income, the effects of the application of these reduced taxes will be similar to the effect of the application of the 20% flat tax rate of the NHR. So it will definitely be a way of attracting talent to Portugal.
Of course.
But we still need to wait.
Yeah, let's hope and fingers crossed that the government will go with this new legislation here, because it sounds really great for attracting a new talent here, because 15% tax rate is probably one of the lowest in Europe. Even in Russia right now, they're increasing it to 15%. I guess we can get to NHR right now. Yes, hottest topic. Yeah. And first of all, I would like to talk a little bit about an old regime, yeah, because it's still active, it's still in action, and then we'll switch to the new one. Okay. So about an old regime, the first question, yeah, it was cancelled in October and November last year, yeah?
No, it was cancelled on the 31st of December of last year. Yeah, but still, for example, is it possible for newcomers to get an NHR as it was before, or it's already not possible? Well, it's still possible. The first, you need to mandatorily register as tax resident of Portugal until the 31st of December of this year. The second...
This year, 2024.
2024.
Okay.
And the second, you in case you want the regime to be applicable in 2024, or applying to 2024, you must register until the 31st of March of 2025 as NHR, which is different. One thing is registering as tax resident. The other is registering under the NHR regime. But you can register as NHR afterwards, with the effect of not applying. For instance, if you register as NHR on the 1st of May of 2025, it will apply only to 25 onwards. However, what is the most complex part here? You will only be able to register under this regime and under these deadlines in case you meet some specific grandfathering provisions that were set forth by the law that cancelled the NHR, which was the state budget for 2024.
What are provisions?
There are several. So having, for instance, an application for a residence permit started before the 31st of December of last year, having a promissory purchase agreement of real estate signed before the 10th of October of last year. And why the 10th of October? Because the cancellation of the NHR was announced on the 10th of October. Well, you have, at the end of the day, several ways. Also, one that I would like to highlight because it's very common. Having a promissory employment contract that foreseeing that the functions will be exercised within the Portuguese territory, signed before the 31st of December of last year. So basically, and bottom line, the intention of the government was, okay, you can, in specific cases, register as an HR and throughout 2024, but you need to prove that in 2023 you had made or you had taken some steps that under which the intention of moving to Portugal was clear. And only under these specific provisions you will be able to access the grandfathering regime.
That actually sounds fair. You prove that you wanted to live in Portugal before they cancelled. Yes, NHR. So yeah, you are subject to NHR. If you just decided to move in 2024, yeah. So welcome to the new reality.
In case you only decide to move in 2024, and it's absolutely the first step that you are taking to move to Portugal. You do not have a property in Portugal. You never had basically anything to do with Portugal. In that case, most likely we will not be able to benefit from the old NHR or any grandfathering provision.
Actually, yeah, you also mentioned that if, for example, I applied for residency or something like that, yeah, before the 31st of December, then I'm subject to the NHR, yeah, to the old one.
Well, what happens is that to the extent you had started the process of application for a residence permit in Portugal before the 31st of December,
yeah.
Once you receive your residence card, you can, number one, go to the tax authorities and change your tax address to Portugal. And this must occur until the 31st of December of this year. And number two, apply for the NHR. That's perfectly fine.
Yeah. So for the digital nomads, it's quite clear, yeah? Digital nomad started his application for, I don't know, in November 2023. Yeah, he got to the embassy, got his visa and everything. Yeah, it's quite clear. But there is also another program, quite popular in Portugal. It's startup visa program. You're probably familiar with that one, yeah? And the startup visa is actually more difficult process because first, you need to get an approval by IPME, your innovation agency. Yeah, and only after this approval you can get to your residency, yeah, to obtain your residency. And for example, if I downloaded my application to IPME in November 2023, can it be considered as my intention to live in Portugal and to be considered as a subject to an old NHR regime?
Well, the grandfathering provisions provide that you must have started the application under the applicable legislation, and by applicable legislation, the immigration law. To the extent you have started before that date, you can apply for the old NHR. It's debatable whether that authorization with the IPME can be seen as the beginning of the process, although it effectively is. In my point of view, there are grounds to sustain that specific act of asking to the IPME for the certification, there is the intention of coming to Portugal and taking the first steps for applying for the residence permit. So it's not clear. So the grandfathering provisions have some gaps that we need to fill in. There was an understanding issued by the tax authorities, but it still leaves it has some pitfalls. But yeah, in my view, there is no black and white answer to that question. But I believe there are grounds to sustain that it was effectively the first step that is necessary to obtain that residence permit, and hence you can access the grandfathering provisions of the NHR.
So it's still debatable, but people who already got residency through this process, they can try. Yeah.
Yeah, in my view, yes.
Yeah, and once again, till what date is it possible? Till the end of this year, it's possible to apply for.
So we have two different concepts here.
Yeah.
Concept number one: change of tax residence.
Yeah.
That change must occur until 31st of December of 2024. Period. Number two: application for the NHR. That can happen. In case you want to benefit from the NHR in 2024, which will be, well, most cases, that must happen until the 31st of March of 2025. But in case you miss this deadline for some reason, you can register in 2026, but what will happen is that you will benefit from the NHR only as from 2026 onwards, and always until 2033. So the window is fixed. It will not move. So according to the provisions that we have, the NHR under the grandfathering provisions will always end in 2033.
Okay, it's quite clear, and it's very interesting point about AppMay and about NHR. Yeah, some myths. Yeah, there is a quite very widespread myth that if you got an NHR, you pay 0%. So, what can you say about it? If, for example, I work abroad, yeah, but live in Portugal, reside in Portugal, I have the old NHR regime. In this case, am I subject to zero tax, or I still have to pay something?
Well, I would like to add that there are two misconceptions on the NHR. First, that you do not need to pay any taxes in Portugal. And number two, that you do not need to file any tax return in Portugal. That's completely wrong. The easiest one is the part of the tax return. The NHR does not exempt you in any tax compliance obligation, so you will need to file a tax return in Portugal reporting your worldwide income. Reporting the worldwide income is a consequence of being a tax resident of Portugal. You are subject to taxes on your worldwide income, but you might have some exemptions. The NHR works in a way that is relatively simple. For foreign sourced income, it can be exempt to the extent the applicable tax treaty entered between Portugal and the source country provides that it can be taxed in Portugal and on the other country. This typically happens with passive income. So dividends, interest, royalties that you receive from abroad typically will be exempt in Portugal under the applicable treaty. You must always make a case-by-case analysis, look into the tax treaty, but in principle it will be exempt. The opposite happens, for instance, with capital gains. So the first NHR provides that capital gains can be exempt in Portugal to the extent, again, it can be taxed in the source country. The issue here is that most tax treaties provide that only Portugal can tax the capital gains on shares.
Yes.
And mentioning specifically capital gains on shares. So what happens is that I've had several clients that sold shares in non-Portuguese companies and thought that they will be exempt in Portugal, but they found out that they will be taxed at a rate of 28%. Portugal will credit under the applicable tax treaty the tax that you paid abroad, but you will be taxed here at 28%. There are exceptions, such as Brazil. The tax treaty with Portugal and Brazil provides that the capital gains can be taxed in Brazil. So you are exempt in Portugal, but there are not so much. Then you have also the employment income or freelance income. In case it's sourced in Portugal, you will be taxed either at progressive rates, the standard rates, or at the 20% flat tax rates in case it falls within the high added value criteria. And in case the income is obtained outside of Portugal, so it's sourced outside of Portugal, for the specific case of employment income, it will be exempt only in case it's effectively taxed in the source country.
Mm-hmm. So let's imagine I'm getting a salary, yeah, I'm an official employee of the company in Armenia, for example, and I'm paying taxes in Armenia. In this case, in Portugal, I will pay 0.
Well, the point here is first you need to look at the tax treaty to check the residence, and number 2, you need to determine which NHR provision will apply. In case, for instance, the work is performed in Armenia,
yes,
and it's effectively taxed in Armenia, and it's employment income, it will be exempt in Portugal. But you need to prove that the income was effectively taxed and that you were effectively subject to tax in Armenia.
Mm-hmm. So to prove that, it's possibly like a tax declaration. So if you provide the tax declarations that you pay the income in Armenia, in this case you are free. But there is and also quite a tricky situation, and it's very common among people who used to live in Russia, Ukraine, or Kazakhstan. Yeah, many people come to Georgia. Not the state, but the country. Come to Georgia, and in Georgia there is a special tax regime, 1%, yes, for freelancers. So, and they think that if they actually work through the entity in Georgia, like a freelancer, and live in Portugal and get an NHR, then they will have not to pay any tax in Portugal. What is your opinion about that?
Well, you need to be very careful with those types of arrangements. First, I've had several clients that have, for instance, incorporated companies in what we call blacklisted jurisdictions, and they weren't aware, for instance, of the CFC rules. Yeah. The CFC rules, well, this is, of course, very simplistic. Basically, they allocate a portion of the income at the level of the company directly in the hands to the hands of the individual. So you must be always very careful when you have some sort of income that is either sourced in a blacklisted jurisdiction or is super low taxed. It's not necessarily illegal or it's not necessarily illegitimate, but you need to bear in mind that it takes proper planning and a case-by-case analysis.
Yeah. I will also just clarify for our viewers that CFC rules, it's controlled foreign company rules.
Correct.
Yeah, and the main guideline is that if you own the company, for example, for 100%, and you have it only for tax benefits reasons, in this case, you have to be paying taxes also in Portugal, in this case, if it's in tax haven. So it's quite clear, as I understand, you need to be very careful with NHR, and it's a really not the smartest way just to pay 0% and don't take care about your tax situation, and you mentioned that if you have an HR and you in some cases you can pay 20%, in some cases you can pay through the progressive rate, and you pay 20% when you are in the list of high qualified jobs, right?
Yeah, it's a list of high added value activities. So it provides a number of codes of activities that are deemed as being of high added value. So
like IT, for example,
Say so IT engineers, for instance, they fall within that concept, and so they have the access to the 20% flat tax rate for 10 years. That has been extremely popular, of course, but unless you fall within that criteria, you can even be an NHR, but still be subject to 48% in case it's not a high added value activity. So you need, what we do with our clients is basically, well, first we learn what their profession is, we look into the list of high added value activity and determine whether he can access the 20% flat tax rate. In case his profession doesn't fall within that concept, well, then the progressive rates will apply.
So, thank you so much for the answers about the old NHR regime. So, what are main difference between the old NHR and the new one?
Well, I called it NHR 2.0 or new NHR just for ease of reference because, well, most of our clients are non-Portuguese. And the NHR was something that always rings a bell in the heads of those that want to or plan to relocate to Portugal. And it's NHR 2.0 because in terms of tax benefits, it basically mimics the benefits of the previous NHR, but with a twist on the capital gains that we will address a bit down the road. The main difference is indeed the scope of beneficiaries. So the first interaction of the NHR, anyone coming to Portugal, moving the tax resident to Portugal, to the extent it hadn't lived in Portugal in the previous 5 years, he was entitled to the regime. Now, to access this new regime, you have the same criteria. You cannot have been a resident in Portugal in the previous 5 years, but you must be inserted within a specific context. And what is the context? You must be an employee of a specific set of eligible companies, so companies in the exporting sector, companies that invest heavily in R&D, and also startup companies. The startup being the most popular route until now, or the route that I feel that people are more interested in. Also, university professors are eligible, and other possibilities ahead, but still a lot narrower. The only possibility that can be a bit seen as a bit broader is on the case of future tax residents in Madeira or the Azores, because the government granted to Madeira and the Azores the possibility of, within the concept or within the rules of a regional decree that both archipelagos can create, they can somehow broaden the scope of the new NHR. However, either for the new NHR under startup certification or any other, we do not have the final regulation that will come all of this to fruition. So as of today, we have the regime, but we still need some further regulation to have it completely in force. This further regulation will be issued by some entities that are specifically set forth by the legislation, but as of today, they haven't issued anything. And the regional governments of the Azores and Madeira have also been changing. There were elections very recently, so this hasn't been seen as a priority for now. So we are all waiting for news that hopefully will come very soon.
Mm-hmm. So we don't know when it's gonna happen, but someday, hopefully, maybe this summer, it would happen. Yeah.
That's my. I hope so. Well, summer is vacations. So
So probably not summer.
There is always that point to consider, but I believe that at the latest, by the end of the year, we will have something. To be honest, my impression or my guess would be that today, in May, we would already have something, and that the program will be in force. But that's not the case. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is. So we must wait. Until then, we are analyzing with our clients the best routes to achieve the NHR. The most popular until now is through the startup certification.
So just to clarify, so the startup certification in this case, it's a certificate by APME, yeah?
No. The certification is made by Startup Portugal.
Startup Portugal,
yes.
Okay.
So basically, there were two stages. First, like 1 year ago, the government issued a law providing the concept of startup under the Portuguese legislation. Then, only in December of last year, there was the issuance of a regulation foreseeing the process for certifying that startup. So it's really super recent. There are several routes for achieving that certification. So by having some sort of investment from some eligible activities, or by demonstrating that your business model is innovative and that will bring an added value and has a rapidly scalable business. But everyone is still trying to understand, together with Startup Portugal, how all of this will work. But it will be of utmost importance because by having a Portuguese entity certified as startup, employees and board members of those startups will, in principle, be eligible for NHR 2.0. So it's an important tool that Portugal will have to attract more startups. Of course, we already are kind of a startup hub with the Web Summit, well, several tech companies here. But this will be a good extra appetizer to come to Portugal.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned Madeira and the Azores. I know that you told us that right now it's still not clear how it would work. But you probably already have some guessing, how this regime would work for Madeira and the Azores.
Well, it's still a bit unclear. So the law provides that the NHR, the new NHR may apply to investment activities carried out in Madeira or Azores under the terms of original decree. Of course, there are always rumors, but nothing specific. And until having something really specific, it's difficult to comment. However, Madeira has, since the 80s, a tradition of trying to be competitive through taxes. Madeira has a specific tax regime for corporate income tax that we know. And I believe that with this additional tool for personal income tax, Madeira will try to take this opportunity to distinguish itself as an asset for high net worth individuals looking into a new jurisdiction. I believe we will have a very interesting regime, but as of today, what we know is basically that the regime will grant a specific set of benefits under terms that, well, we still need to
So we
see.
need to wait.
We need to wait.
Yeah, probably it's going to be a reason to make one more video in the future with you about the new how it would work at Madeira. Yeah, but still, you mentioned that this NHR 2.0 is only for the limited number of professions. So for startuppers and for university professionals. And for example, if I'm, let's say, IT specialist, in this case, I can't be a subject to this regime, or I can be.
Well, we need to wait for the regulation. But according to what seems to be the rationale behind the new legislation, I believe it will be a case where you will be eligible for it. However, you need to be, for instance, in that example, an IT professional working for a company that itself is foreseen in the regime. For instance, an IT professional working in a startup company or working in the company that has a relevant level of exports. So you need to be somehow within the framework of the regime or of companies eligible for the regime. But we will see still more details in the next few months.
Okay, let's hope that we will have them soon. So this new NHR, for foreign income, it works the same as an old one, or are there any differences?
Well, it works almost the same. It has been somehow simplified. It basically provides that, foreign sourced income is exempt, but we have the twist of having the inclusion of capital gains. Well, the capital gains now, in the previous NHR, as I mentioned, most of the cases in practice would lead, particularly in the sale of shares, would lead to taxation in Portugal at a rate of 28%. Now, with NHR 2.0, there is an exemption on the sale of foreign-based assets. So the sale of shares from non-Portuguese companies will be exempt in Portugal. This is, of course, very interesting, particularly for people that are in the divestment phase on a specific company. So yeah, that's the main difference that we can see from a passive income perspective. Then we have a 20% rate applicable to employment or freelance income in the eligible companies. So yeah, the tax benefits are really super similar. I believe that the main difference is in the scope of beneficiaries.
So, but the capital gains, it's really great benefit, because a lot of people selling their companies and go to the Portugal to live here, and a lot of people actually in the process of selling their companies, and they sell when they are already the Portuguese tax residents, and in this case, if you sell the foreign company and you're already a Portuguese tax resident and subject to this regime, it's a really great advantage for you. So you pay 0%. But in this case, should the tax, should this operation be taxed somewhere else, or there is no guidelines about it? So I mean, for example, if I sell my foreign company and pay no taxes anywhere, in this case, would I be free from the capital gain tax, or still have to pay something?
The main point here is that when you sell a company outside of Portugal, let's say a company, Russia is not a good example.
Let's say Cyprus.
In Cyprus, we would typically look to a tax treaty to see which country is allowed to tax. Most tax treaties only allow the resident state to tax capital gains on the sale of companies. So in practice, you would be exempt in Portugal, and the other country is simply not allowed to tax the income under the applicable tax treaty. So the answer is no, the other country simply cannot tax it under the tax treaty, so you are protected by
Portuguese and by tax treaties. That's really amazing, I guess. For a lot of entrepreneurs, it's a great benefit. And about dividends, in this case, so with the new NHR as with an old one, you can be free from dividends,
Yes.
From foreign activity.
Yes. So dividends are typically exempt in Portugal. There is one specific twist that has gathered several questions in the past, which was dividends coming from blacklisted jurisdictions. But Portugal has this thing of blacklisting jurisdictions with which Portugal has a tax treaty.
Emirates.
Like Emirates, Panama also.
Yes.
But this has since been clarified that, for instance, dividends from a Dubai company are exempt in Portugal because the tax treaty supersedes the fact that the country is blacklisted. And this was extremely important because the fallback of not having the exemption would be the taxation at aggravated rates of 35%. Portugal aggravates the applicable tax rates in passive income, such as interest, dividends, or royalties, in case they come from the list of blacklisted jurisdictions. One thing that is relevant to note is that the list of Portuguese blacklisted jurisdictions is not the list of the EU list of blacklisted jurisdictions. So the EU has a list of 10, 11, well, it's reviewed every 6 months, but I believe it's 10 or 11 as of today. Portugal has a list over 50.
Yeah, it's a big one.
It's a big one. It's really a big one. So it's always advised to seek tax advice when you have income coming from that jurisdiction, even if you are an AHR, but really to cross-check whether there will be additional tax liability in Portugal or not.
Yeah, about this thing with Emirates you mentioned. Yeah, I read the decision about it, and it was quite funny. Yes, that tax authority said it's a blacklist, but it was a good decision, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah,
it's a very good decision for a taxpayer.
Yeah.
Very good decision because, of course, Dubai, you have almost completely tax-free jurisdictions. Of course, they are doing some reforms, but still almost reforms now, tax-free, and in Portugal you will not pay tax.
Yeah, it's a really great decision. So also, if I'm not mistaken, there is also one difference between the tax regimes. I mean, the old and new NHR is a pension. Yeah.
Of course. Yes. So that's very, very important. Going back some years, when the regime was created in 2009, for several years it was super popular with pensioners. So people that were in their retirement days, they would move to Portugal and they would spend several years here, benefiting from a full exemption from taxes in Portugal over their pension income. Some Scandinavian countries were somehow annoyed with that, and Portugal then introduced a 10% flat rate as from 2020. Now, what is understood is that Portugal, it's a tax policy decision. Portugal does not want to attract those taxpayers anymore through this tax benefit. So the decision was to exclude any sort of tax benefit on pension income. So the new NHR does not provide any benefit in pension income, which will lead to a pensioner coming to Portugal, becoming tax resident of Portugal, will be taxed at the progressive rates of up to 48%, plus the solidarity rates that can lead to 53% of tax. However, there is always one thing that I like to highlight, is that Portugal has a tax rate of 48% applicable over income, we're also speaking above 81,000 euros, but it's a progressive scale, meaning that the effective tax burden is lower because you have, 9 brackets nowadays, so 9 brackets foreseeing a certain interval of income, and that one rate applies, and then the other rate applies, and it goes up to 48%, but the 48% just applies to the income above 81,000 euros. And this is very important to note because sometimes people think that there is a flat rate of 48% applied.
Yes.
And that's not the case.
Yeah, it's quite widespread that a lot of people said, wow, I make more than 81,000, I have to pay 48%. Yeah, and thank you for clearing this out. Yes, that there are brackets, and each bracket is taxed in a different way.
Yes,
in this case. And also deductions, as we mentioned before.
And there are also deductions, of course.
Also deductions. So, thank you for such a broad analysis of NHR, a new and an old one. I guess now it's pretty clear what are the main difference. Yes, that's the main difference actually is still in the people who can use it. Yeah, that's new NHR is mostly used by the companies, yeah, and the old one could be used by almost anyone, yeah, and capital gains is a very important point that the new NHR is really great if you sell in your company abroad and you can pay nothing in Portugal if you're a resident and got a new NHR. Yeah. So, probably the last question which I wanted to ask, it's not about the NHR, but another tax benefit, regressar, yeah, but as I understand, regressar it's only for Portuguese and not for foreigners.
Well, it's not only for Portuguese. Regressar, which is return in Portuguese, it doesn't depend on the nationality. It depends on the fact that at any given point in time, you were a tax resident of Portugal. So let's imagine in practice, you are a Russian and you came to Portugal in 2009, you lived for 5 years until 2014, and then you left, and now you want to come back. You can benefit from the return program. The point here is that you cannot have been a resident of Portugal in the previous 5 years, but you must have been a resident of Portugal at any given point in time before those previous 5 years.
So even a year, if I was a resident for even a year, it's totally okay, yes?
Yes, it's totally okay. And then what the program gives is for 5 years, it grants you a 50% exemption on professional income, so employment income or freelance income. There is a cap of 250,000 euros, but still it's a 50% exemption of personal income tax. So it's extremely competitive. It was created, again, the same rationale that I explained before. So attracting back to Portugal talents that at a given point in time moved abroad. So you moved abroad for 5 years, but you lived here, you studied here, or you spent some time here. Now you want to come back, you have the 50% exemption during 5 years. But that 50% exemption doesn't apply to dividends or other sources of other types of passive income. Only employment income or freelance income.
Active income, let's say. Yeah,
active
only
income.
active income. But still, for example, if in 5 years I make 500,000, in this case I will have to pay only 250.
Yes, that's in rough terms. That's the case. One important thing to note is that the registration, as of today, can only be done until the 31st of December of 2026. So it's not a regime that will be enforced in principle for the long term. It's available until the end of 2026, and it has the benefit that you mentioned, and it's pretty effective.
Yeah, so it's pretty good.
In some cases, for active income, it can even be more beneficial than the 20% flat tax rate. So it depends. You, of course, need to do the calculations. But for some clients, we have made the calculation that it's more beneficial for them to use the return program than the NHR. So it's an interesting balance. And with having the NHR with the narrower scope now, foreseeing only employees of certain companies and the other ones that we discussed, the return program is for sure super important.
Yeah, I guess also some immigrants who has probably been residents before, yes, they still may be interested in this option because it's not so widespread. Yeah, and I mean, Portuguese people probably know about it, but among foreigners, I haven't seen much information about regressar, because probably most of the foreigners thought that it's only applied to the Portuguese people. Yeah,
and most of them probably never lived in Portugal.
Yes.
And you need to have had in the past some sort of connection with Portugal through the fact that you were residing here.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you so much for interview and such valuable information, because I guess such a profound knowledge in taxes, it's not so widespread, So you're really great. Thank you so much for the interview.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I hope to see you in our other interviews, probably about how the NHR would work here in Madeira,
Amazing.
So we will wait for the news from you.
Amazing.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
Okay everyone, today we had a really long and profound video about the taxation system in Portugal. I hope you liked it and it was interesting for you. Soon we're gonna have one more video with a NEWCO corporation about the incorporation of the company at Madeira and what benefits it has for its founders and why it's better to incorporate at Madeira and not in other jurisdictions. If you're still thinking about moving to Portugal or you already decided that it's your country, then you can get a free consultation from our immigration experts by the link below. Also, if you want to get a consultation about the taxation, you can use a promo code Teleporto Taxes and get a consultation for only 100 euros. So, anyway, if you like this video, please share it with your friends, also with your relatives maybe, who want to relocate to Portugal, and subscribe to our channel. Thank you.